What is up, guys, and welcome back. This week is going to be all about the USA, but not really. It's actually mostly going to be about the KMT, because as I'm sure you are aware, the US doesn't do a whole lot in the early game, and as we've been doing these videos, the cutoff has usually been around July of 1939, when Germany goes to war with the rest of Europe historically. And up until that point, the U.S. can't do pretty much anything. So I will touch on some U.S. tech and what roles to start getting out with your 4 to 5 factories. And then after that, we're going to talk about some early game KMT strategy as opposed to really anything to do with the U.S. So let's go. Alright, starting off here with US Tech. You start with 4 major factories, and usually on my first turn, what I'm going to use with my measly income is upgrade a 5th factory to a major. There can be an argument to be made for having 6 as the US, but that's a discussion for another video. Usually I just go with 5 because you'll get all the tech you'll ever need with that. So here I'm going to do tiers of 5. We'll go with the obvious one first, wartime. Now there can be an argument to be made that wartime isn't a tier 1 tech for the US because it takes them so long to get into the war. But it's just one of those things where I'd rather be safe than sorry, because if you put it off until later and get some other techs before wartime, if you have a couple bad rolls, then suddenly you're in the war without it, and that sucks. So I just go ahead and put it in the first tier and get it out of the way. Next up, we'll go with jet fighters, because as the US, you can afford jet fighters, one of the few major powers who can, and you can afford multiple jet fighters per turn. So these are going to be really good to lend-lease to other countries who are fighting while you cannot. That's the best unit in the game that you can get to your allies. Up next, we're going to go with our tech objective here. Again, it's either heavy bombers or strategic rockets. I'm going to go with heavy bombers almost 100% of the time, just because they're better than rockets. And so if you have to get them both, you may as well go with heavy bombers first. Next up, dropping down to improved construction. Again, a naval heavy power like the US is going to benefit greatly from improved construction. So the earlier you can get it out, the better. And finally, this one's kind of flexible. I'm going to put attack transports here because either way you go, if you're going heavy Atlantic, you're going to need attack transports to make a landing in Europe. If you're going heavy Pacific, you're going to need attack transports to take those islands from the Japanese. Okay, so for tier 2, this is where it starts to get, a little bit ambiguous. I'm going to go with advanced artillery here. For the second video in a row, advanced artillery beats out advanced mechs. And that's because the two benefits of mechanized over artillery is that they have better defense and they're faster. Now, if you're going in the Pacific as the United States, you can't use either of those benefits of the mech because obviously if you're island hopping, you're not going to be using the 2 movement of the mechs. And if you're taking islands from the Japanese, they probably aren't in a position to counterattack you, so that boosted defense isn't really going to help you either. So I'm going with advanced artillery here. Up next, we're going with our 2 other tech objective techs, long-range aircraft and strategic rockets. Long-range aircraft is a great tech for the United States regardless. It would be in tier 2 no matter what, just because you're far away from the war, you've got a long way to go. And there could be an argument made to put long-range aircraft in tier 1, but for now I'm going to leave it in tier 2. And then obviously strategic rockets, nobody wants to get it, but you have to. It's for a victory point. And the hitting on 9s is pretty tough, so you want to get that out relatively early in the game so you can actually make sure you get that tech. Up next, I'm also going to put advanced subs here in tier 2. I think I've made it pretty clear that I really like this unit. They're relatively cheap, and with the advanced subs, you're going to get better performance than you would just building destroyers unless you're the Japanese. It's just a better unit than a destroyer for the same price. So I really liked them as kind of your filler ships for your Navy. and they're really hard to kill. So if you attack somebody, it's going to be hard for them to counterattack you if you have these advanced subs. So it's a good unit and very good for the United States. Lastly, here for Tier 2, we're kind of getting to the range where it's like, you can just kind of pick whatever you want now. I'm putting heavy carriers down here. More planes is good because your planes have a long way to go. And so if you've got carriers that can carry 3 of them, that's a good deal for you. And it's a pretty cool unit. It's a fun unit, and I just kind of like to get them out there. Moving on to our final tier here. This is kind of getting to the end of the game where you're just kind of throwing darts out there. Now, these 2 up here are Special Case, Advanced Mechs, and Heavy Armor. A case can be made to Lend-Lease heavy armor to, say, the Russians, so you might want to get those a little bit earlier than your Tier 3 here as well. And also, if you're going a heavy Atlantic strategy, going to make a landing into Europe, then Advanced Mechs and Heavy Armor are actually a really, really good combo for the Americans, and you might bump them up to Tier 1 or 2, depending on what your strategy is going to be. Advanced Anti-Sub Warfare isn't even going on this list. You've got some convoy lines. You know, you've got the one for the Philippines, which probably is going to get cut off. And then your convoy lines in the Atlantic are relatively protected. You may get a couple German subs on them, but not enough to merit getting this tech. Same deal for radar. You don't have a lot of air bases near the action, so you're not going to do a ton of scrambling, and you're not going to be defending your convoys, too much. So radar's kind of in the same boat, but I'll put it here in Tier 3 just because it is still a decent tech, and if you've got nothing else to do, then you might as well. Improved factories. Again, there can be an argument to be made to do these a little bit earlier. The thing is, the US has so much production in the continental United States that you don't need improved factories. You start with so many factories. You're never going to need improved factories unless you're doing an explicit strategy to try to build factories elsewhere on the board. So say you want to build a couple factories in the Philippines for this strategy that you're doing, then yeah, improved factories is a good deal. But for most American strategies, you're not going to really need this tech. You've got plenty of production in the US. Next up is heavy battleships. These 2 are pretty much interchangeable. I'm always going to go with the carriers over the battleships just because I think they're a more useful unit. Heavy battleships are a very fun unit, and they've got a ton of punch. They hit on almost all of their rolls. So it's a very, very fun unit, and if you want heavy battleships over heavy carriers, then do that. It's up to you. All right, let's move on to some early game moves. All right, real quickly here, I'm going to touch on the United States. So obviously, you can't do anything until you get to 15 IPPs of peacetime income, in which case you can start to Lend-Lease. That's probably not going to happen until July of 1939, which is beyond the scope of this video. You'll probably get $5 from the Japanese attacking China, so you'll be sitting at 11 most of the time. So in lieu of building units in the United States and starting to stockpile them a little bit, I usually upgrade a factory to a major as soon as possible, and you can upgrade 2 of them if you want. It's totally up to you. And then the rest of the money I just pocket and get a huge stockpile of money so that when I can start Lend-Leasing, I can Lend-Lease to the British, the French, and the KMT, and possibly the Russians on every turn. The French are really going to need it, and you can help the UK rebuild their air force really, really quickly. And you can't even Lend-Lease to the Soviets until they're at war with a major power, so they'll come later, but they will probably need a little bit of help, probably. And then, you gotta wait for the Burma Road to open before you can Lend-Lease to the KMT, and by that point they will probably desperately need help. So they're gonna be pretty high on the pecking order for Lend-Lease as soon as you get to that $15 of peacetime income. All right, and that's all I got for the US. The rest of this video is going to be all about the KMT. Okay, let's chat about the KMT a little bit. This is one of the most interesting parts of the entire game, is the conflict here in the the Asia theater. Right off the bat, the KMT have the firepower to kill the CCP. If you bring every single infantry unit you have, plus all the ones that you build into Szechwan, and then immediately attack the CCP on turn 3, when it is, the first turn that it's feasible to do so, then you can probably wipe them out. But that will leave you really weak to a Japanese landing. Your entire coast is going to be empty. So you can do that, but I don't usually recommend it. And what's usually going to happen is you're going to get invaded by the Japanese, and you're going to align all these warlords. And at that point, your whole purpose, kind of like France on the other side of the world, is to stall. You want to protect your money. Nanking is a victory point. You want to try to hold that as much as possible, and Nanking is going to give your infantry boosted defense. So as long as you can keep from getting surrounded, that's a good deal. Hunan down here is a good candidate to avoid that encirclement debuff. And then beyond that, eventually, if the Japanese are going really heavy into China, eventually you're not going to be able to hold the coast anymore. As the Japanese are driving you back, you want to be trying to inflict as many casualties on them as possible. So make them fight your big stacks of infantry. I don't recommend ever attacking them, because your KMT units attack like crap. They've got the retreat debuff, and it's usually going to be a 1 or a 2 that you're attacking with. Really attacking with infantry is just kind of a waste. So I really only ever use them on defense, try to build strong points and make the Japanese try to crack them, which is usually going to be very expensive for the Japanese, which is good for you even if you're losing units. If you're taking out Japanese units with you, that is good. Keep doing that. That is weakening the Japanese for their later conquests, which is the point of the KMT. So once they're strong enough to push you out of Nanking and Yunnan, retreat back to Kwangtung and Yunnan here. Eventually, just hole up in Yunnan, because that's where you get your Lend-Lease through, the Burma Road. And it is a really, really tough nut to crack if you can get a bunch of infantry in there, and then keep on receiving Lend-Lease. I really, almost every game I play the KMT, I end up with a huge ball of death in Yunnan that is uncrackable. And then eventually, once the Japanese are sufficiently weakened, you can sweep back through China. And all the while, the CCP won't be doing much, because if the Japanese attack early, then that nullifies their alignment rolls. So unless they got super lucky, they're probably still just kind of sitting in Shinsi, and who knows, the Japanese might even kill them. It's worry about Japan first, retreat slowly, try to take as many casualties as possible. On the defense, don't waste your infantry by attacking with them. You're having, or even quartering the potential they have to kill things. Unless you've got them crushed, you've got them outnumbered 5-1, then go ahead and attack and try to snipe a plane or something. But really, really try to use your infantry to the best of their abilities, which is going to be on defense in the mountains or in your cities, Nanking and Peking. But yeah, that's basically the gist of the KMT. Just survive, baby. Survive and try to whittle the Japanese down to make the other allied powers' lives easier. And I really, really think that Yunnan is going to be the best place for you to make your final stand and wait out the storm if things get really bad. Alright guys, that's all I got for this week. I will see you next time. Love you.